I'm so glad you've joined us for day one of Shape the Future, our global webinar series. My name is Dr. Vince Liardi. I'm a part-time faculty member myself, but in my full time, I'm our global marketing lead for thought leadership and higher education. And honestly, I can't think of a better way than to be spending time with this community who's keen to learn about this topic today. So before we get started, I just want to give you a quick sense of what this series has in store for the week. Over the coming days, we've brought together some of the sharpest minds in education and AI to tackle the questions that matter most for all of us working in higher education right now. And I really believe that today's not just the opening chapter, but it's going to set us on a great foot for the rest of the week. And it's a very strong talk that we have keyed up for today. So a few housekeeping notes before we begin. This is a multi-day event. Each session is designed to stand on its own. So I encourage you to share this with your colleagues. Like I said, we've had thousands of educators sign up for this all over the world. But if you have faculty members who love learning and about AI and the trends and the key topics that are happening, we'll pop the registration link again into the chat and feel free to share with your colleagues. Encourage them to register for the 3 sessions we have ahead. And they can also register and view today's as a recording as well. So for today's session, you're welcome to ask questions. You'll see in the Zoom, there'll be a Q&A panel that you can post your question in. So use that to ask questions rather than general chat. The general chat is open for you to connect with your fellow educators, but if you put a question in that, it probably will get lost, to be honest. We love seeing the collaboration in the chat. I just ask that you make sure that the conversation is supportive and professional as we learn together. And one firm ground rule, this is where I have put my teacher hat on for a bit and have to set a rule, but no sharing links in the chat. I know many of you have, books you want to recommend or something like that, but please do so as just by typing. We know that even though links can be shared with the best intentions, we don't want to pose any security risks for our attendees. So we try and keep this open to bring as many people in as possible, and it only takes one bad actor to share a link that could put somebody's security at risk. So please respect that boundary. No sharing links in the chat. A couple other things, Zoom closed captioning is available, so please take advantage of that if it helps. I believe there's also an option there to switch to your local language for translation. And also watch for your inbox over the next few days. You'll get a Credly badge for attending. It will come if it's not there within 24, 48 hours. I promise we'll be working on it, so just give it some time. If you don't have it after this week, feel free to email us, but it will be coming. And I really think that Credly badge is a great way to mark your professional development, and it's well worth sharing on LinkedIn. So to ground our discussion today, let's address a critical challenge for teachers. It's something that keeps me up at night, honestly, is how does AI support learning instead of replacing it? And I want to explore how we can move past shortcuts and towards a more meaningful partnership between educators, students, and technology. I really believe that's the way for the future, is educators, students, and this technological bridge coming together to find solutions. And that is the question that is at the heart of today's session. And I don't think there's anyone better placed to help guide us through it. Our speaker today is Dr. Mutlu Cukurova. He's a professor of learning and artificial intelligence at University College in London. Mutlu's work lives at the intersection of human cognition, AI systems, and educational design. And his thinking has been shaped not just by academic research, but by real-world policy as well. He directs the UCL AI in Education and Learning Analytics team. He leads design and use of AI in Education module. He also brings his expertise to many international bodies like UNESCO, OECD, the European Commission, and he's authored several widely cited papers around guidelines of AI in education. Can honestly say the breadth of his leadership in this field is remarkable. He's also chaired international conferences on artificial intelligence and education, learning analytics, and most recently LAK 2026. He appears in Stanford University's top 2% of scientists across AI and education, and he also serves as the editor-in-chief of the British Journal of Educational Technology. So extremely strong bio. And in short, I think I can wrap this all up by saying I don't, think there's someone who's thought more carefully than Mutlu. So we're delighted to have you today on the call, Mutlu, to guide us through this conversation, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction and the kind invitation. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, to be part of this discussion. Today, I will be talking about human AI partnership with a particular focus on teacher AI teaming. My goal is not necessarily to get into the specifics of particular research papers, but to give a broad conceptual presentation. I will be referring to various empirical evidence pieces. But if there's any interest later on, any questions about any particular study to discuss in more detail, I would be very happy and available to answer any questions. Let me very quickly share my screen, if I may. And I think now you should be seeing my screen. Please do let me know if you are not seeing my screen or if there are any technical issues.
We were seeing your note slide.
All right. Okay. Is this better?
Perfect. Thank you.
That's great.
Brilliant.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mutlu.
Thank you, Britlin. Thank you, Vince. Thank you very much for your help. As I mentioned, today I will be talking about human AI partnership, and I would like to perhaps distinguish some of the existing emerging evidence on the value of AI in education. At the moment, most of the discussion within the field has been focusing on the binary distinctions between AI causing significant detrimental impact on particular learning competencies and particular critical thinking skills versus hypes that are surrounding AI helping students achieve significant learning gains in particular subject areas and knowledge acquisition. I would like to maybe bring in a little bit more nuance into this discussion with regards to the observed potential contradictory results in the research evidence, and maybe try to explain why this might be happening and why we are observing these different sides of the coin as a potential story of the AI in education in the field. I would like to start by highlighting the fact that in most of the existing AI field research, empirical research, the performance of the models are measured based on the model's capabilities of completing particular complex tasks. And this is what we are calling the benchmarking task. So in the AI field, more from the computer science point of view, we tend to measure the performance of AI models by looking at the extent to which they are able to complete complex tasks. And indeed, if you look at the emerging evidence in this space, a couple of findings emerge. Number one, the complexity of the tasks at which we are measuring the performance of AI is indeed increasing. So in the past, we would be perhaps looking at tasks like separating cat videos or cat images from dog images. Image classification kind of tasks were the primary concerns in AI performance measures. But in recent years, we have very complex benchmarking tasks. One of these tasks, for instance, is AI models' ability to be able to answer PhD level science questions, very complex, very difficult questions. And indeed, state of the field large language models are improving their performance in these very complex benchmarking tasks. Another really interesting emerging finding in the field is that if you actually compare the performance of best humans in the same tasks, like answering PhD level science questions, many of the state of the field large language models, foundational models, are actually outperforming humans as well. So from an AI researcher point of view, these are very exciting developments in the field. But what this does not really tell us is whether humans working with these AI models are indeed becoming more capable through their interaction with these models. Model's performance on its own to complete a task is one thing, but the model's performance to help a human to complete these tasks is a completely different phenomenon. So we actually, particularly from the AI in education point of view, we need to start conceptualizing the value of AI with regards to its capability of helping humans improve human capabilities over time. Of course, you would expect some kind of correlation between the technical superiority, intelligence of the model, but these kind of technical superiorities of the model to be able to complete a complex task does not always imply the pedagogical superiority of the model. So the first distinction point I think that is very important to highlight here is that yes, indeed, AI is making significant progress, but oftentimes this progress is defined by automating tasks that were once thought to be uniquely human and can only be performed by humans. Whereas in AI in education, we need a paradigm shift. We need to think about how do we actually design human AI systems that increase human competence rather than displacing it. If you think about these terms, then AI in education perhaps can be conceptualized in three paradigms. The first paradigm is using AI for particular human tasks to replace these tasks with the help of AI. Or you can think about AI as an opportunity for humans to interact with these computational models, for humans to change their own representation of thought. So humans should be learning from AI models through their interactions in complementary interaction paradigm. Or you can think about AI in education within the paradigm of synergy, in which you would try to build tightly coupled human AI systems in which cognition and control are distributed across different agents of humans and artificial agents. So the competence is emerging at the system level rather than expecting the competence at an individual agent alone. Now, these are quite abstract terms, but during the talk, I will get into more specifics. In the beginning of the talk, I think it is important to perhaps highlight with mathematical precision what is exactly expected in these three different paradigms in terms of dependent variables. So in the replacement paradigm, the expectation would be humans working with AI achieving the performance of completing a task that is either equivalent or superior to human alone. But in the long term, human competence over time would flatten or would decrease. In the complementarity paradigm, you would expect human plus AI performance to be superior to the human alone, but in addition to this, you would expect human competence by time to increase as well. And in the synergy paradigm, the expectation would be human plus AI performance to be superior to the maximum of each agent alone, and you would expect by time a competence increase both in humans and in AI through their interactions. Now, if we look at current generative AI use among professional knowledge workers, including teachers, it looks like most of the existing interactions can be categorized in the replacement paradigm. There was a very recent cloud report from Anthropic AI that looked at 4 million conversations to be able to identify in what occupations people tend to use generative AI for more than 75% of their professional tasks. And very surprisingly, they show that 4% of the occupations tend to use AI with such high automation. And among these professions, you can see foreign language teachers and literature teachers as well. When they looked at the categorizations of these interactions with generative AI, researchers indicate that less than 3% of the interactions require humans to initially create their own draft responses, draft answers, to be validated by AI. But from a learning sciences point of view, this kind of initial prior knowledge activation, initial content creation from the human side is extremely important for learning to occur. If you think about this from the student's point of view, you observe a similar pattern that is mirrored by the student interactions. This is the data from about 7,000 students across 7 countries in the EU. And the report essentially indicates that the students primarily use generative AI tools to obtain answers and explanations to particular questions rather than using AI to support their sustained learning processes. Now, you might be wondering this type of replacement paradigm, why it might potentially be detrimental for human competence development. And the emerging evidence is fairly clear in these fronts. So, from the teacher's point of view, for instance, there was a recent randomized control trial that has been undertaken in the UK within 68 representative schools across the United Kingdom. And researchers compared the teachers who are using generative AI as part of their lesson preparation activities versus those teachers who do not use generative AI. And what they show is that indeed, those teachers who are using generative AI can save up to 31% in their lesson resources preparation time. And this time saving, these efficiency gains, these productivity gains are very important considering the fact that teachers are indeed overburdened with heavy workload. But what they also show is that when you look at the quality of the resources that are created in two groups of teachers who are using generative AI versus who are not using generative AI, there was no statistically significant difference in the quality of the resources. So that indicates this mathematical precision that I was trying to bring into the conversation, that teachers who are using AI can indeed improve the productivity gains, but in the long term, their competence might flatten or potentially even decrease. If you look at the story from the student's point of view, you see emerging evidence indicating similar findings. For instance, this particular randomized control trial is undertaken with 1,000 high school mathematics students. And in this particular case, researchers study the control condition as students not using generative AI and two AI condition. One AI condition is GPT based, which is essentially using tools like ChatGPT as they are, what we are calling the vanilla GPT version without any particular system engineering, without any particular prompt engineering of the model, versus GPT tutor, which is the condition in which the researchers gave appropriate system prompt information to the model to behave more like a tutor. And what they show in the evaluation results is fascinating because they show that, yes, when students are using these two AI conditions, both GPT-based and GPT tutor, in the GPT-based condition, they can achieve 48% performance gains to be able to answer homework assignment questions. And in the GPT tutor case, they can achieve 127% performance gains in the homework assignment completion. But when you take the AI condition out and look at the exam results, which were undertaken without any AI, the researchers show that there were 17% losses in students' learning gains in the GPT-based condition and no statistically significant gain in terms of learning in the GPT tutor condition in comparison to those students who did not use generative AI at all. Again, if we think about the mathematical precision, you can see that the tools, these kind of generative AI technologies, can help students and teachers save time to improve their performances, but that does not necessarily mean that the learning gains would occur in the long term and their competence might potentially decrease. Now, that brings me to one of the first major points that I wanted to highlight is that if we look at the current off-the-shelf commercial AI models use cases, what we can see is that the most human AI use operates in this replacement paradigm. So people can use AI to improve their performance while leaving human competence flat or declining. Now, that brings us to this begging question on if this is the challenge of replacement paradigm, how do we actually move towards these alternative conceptualizations on complementarity and potentially synergy? How do we design human AI systems that actually grow human competence? Now, complementarity is a very complex space. And there are different set of variables that would have an impact on the extent to which an AI in education system can be considered as complementary system or not. Some of these features are associated with the human competence, human prior knowledge, their existing skills, their beliefs, their attitudes, their experiences. Some of the variables are associated with the particular AI system design features, what models are used, how the models were trained, what kind of prompt engineering techniques were undertaken, what specific interface is used in order to be able to provide particular affordances in the teachers and students' interaction with these systems. Let me start by giving some examples on what kind of AI system design features we could integrate into AI models to improve the likelihood of them achieving complementarity. One significant set of value comes in our ability to integrate and change the pedagogical theory-driven insights into the system prompts of AI models so that you engineer complementarity through setting up particular constraints to the AI model behaviors towards learning processes, but not helping students to complete tasks only. In this particular set, there are so many examples. I put here one example of a system that we have been developing at UCL, which essentially helps students write essays, but rather than giving any drafts of paragraphs or being providing templates of specific essays, the model would actually work with students in reflective interactions to help students answer particular questions, to do the thinking themselves. And in this particular area of shaping model behaviors through system prompting, there are various set of learning theories that we could use in shaping the model behaviors. For instance, you can start asking the model to provide zone of proximal development appropriate guidance. So you can ask the model to diagnose the current level of mastery of an individual student and not to give too difficult content or too easy content, but align the recommendations of the model to the current level of mastery of the student. You can bring in literature on self-efficacy in order to be able to help students develop their confidence in the particular learning task that they are engaged in. You can help students achieve goal setting in order to be able to help them monitor the extent to which they are making progress in the goals that they are setting to help them improve their metacognitive skills as well. The literature in the learning sciences is very rich in these fronts, but I here clustered three major categories of prompt engineering concepts that I have been using in my own research, but also at the meta reviews level have been studied and shown to improve students' learning outcomes. The first group of behavior setting is associated with learner-centered initiation. So you should be providing system prompts to the model in ways that the model does not provide immediate answer, but it elicits goals, plans, and prior knowledge of the students. So it encourages learner initiation. And this is very interesting because if you remember when I talked about the way that system currently that are available in commercial off-the-shelf models and look at how people are using these systems, one of the fundamental challenges there is that these systems are very unlikely and very rarely encouraging learner initiation or teacher initiation of prior knowledge activation. So that's one of the problematic aspects of the vanilla AI tools that are currently available out there. Another really important aspect of system prompt engineering is this idea of creating inspectable competence models. So you try to build some kind of a knowledge graph, some kind of knowledge components that would help the system make sense of why a particular student is engaged in a set of sub skills and actions, and how these specific actions are connected with larger learning goals. So both the system model, AI model, and the students actually know why they are doing what they are doing, not only told what they should be doing in order to be able to complete a task. And another really important set of prompt engineering behaviors, I think, are associated with this idea of adaptive scaffolding. So at the moment, most of the off-the-shelf AI models are designed for user satisfaction in the sense that they almost always end their interaction by asking you if you would like them to do particular additional tasks, or would you like me to complete this, or would you like me to do that kind of question ending. But from a learning sciences point of view, a lot more valuable endings would actually require scaffolding in which the number of hints, number of explanations, amount of feedback that is provided to the learners is fading away by time so that the learners are actually taking ownership of these interactions. And indeed, if you bring in these kind of learning sciences principles into the particular system prompt engineering approaches into your model and look at the students' interaction with these models, you can see that these pedagogically shaped AI changes interaction patterns of learners, and those patterns are indeed associated with higher learning outcomes. In the example that I have given of a tool that we built to help with essay writing, for instance, we observe that when we bring in these kind of system prompts, students who are interacting with these AI models can achieve higher writing quality and can learn a lot more out of these interactions. Another technique that is frequently used to shape AI behaviors more towards pedagogical behaviors is this idea of building an MCP architecture in which you would bring in a pedagogical agent into the agentic workflow of a system. So rather than building systems that would focus on task completion through improved contextual understanding of an AI agent to provide recommendations, you would feed what we are calling the embedding injections into the recommendations of an educational agent that is driven by the pedagogical evidence of a given task. So in this particular example, for instance, we have been looking at using a pedagogical agent that has the capability of looking at students' sequential patterns while they are working in a small group work in collaborative learning, and then proposes recommendations that are appropriately aligned with the particular action within a given sequence, and proposes teachers recommendations on what kind of interventions they could provide to the students to improve their learning gains in these collaborative interactions. And when we observe the differences between the pedagogical agent-driven workflows versus no pedagogical agentic workflows systems, we observe that number one, when the large language models are not provided with pedagogical agent, they tend to help students in the problem-solving aspects of collaboration rather than helping them focus more on the metacognitive aspects of how to manage the collaborative interactions in collaborative problem-solving dynamics. One of the really interesting findings in this line of work, I also think, is that when we compare human teacher recommendations and interventions versus pedagogical agent recommendations, we see statistically significant differences in terms of the coverage of the type of support humans provide to students versus pedagogical agents provide to students that can provide two interesting opportunities. Number one, you can actually generate these recommendations from pedagogical agents and help teachers work with these agents to learn from these agents so that they can cover student support more holistically. Or you can think about some kind of a division of labor in which pedagogical agents are supporting certain aspects of collaborative problem solving for students, and certain other more relational, more pastoral support is left to the teachers, which provide significant opportunities as well. But regardless of what kind of technique you use in order to be able to shape the pedagogical behaviors of large language models, you need to start evaluating and potentially benchmarking the pedagogical value of the model outputs. And this requires systematic evaluations of the pedagogical outputs of the large language models. It requires a systematic methodology. In our line of work, we are using a methodology that has three basic stages. The first stage is to provide systematic changes to the model behavior. So what I observe is that many faculty members and many researchers currently try to make too many variable changes in the pedagogical behaviors of agents without necessarily studying what is the particular impact of a given change in the initial system prompt that is provided to the model. Number two, you would generate significant amount of model outputs and somehow quantify these model outputs to be able to say that the system that we are providing a pedagogical prompt engineering input into generates statistically significantly different outputs than the models that we do not provide such pedagogical prompt engineering input. And number three, you need some kind of a pedagogical semantic interpretation of the observed statistically significant differences. So let me give you one example of how this methodology is implemented in real world practice from our own research lab investigations. So in our recent work, we have been benchmarking the pedagogical value of using generative AI models for providing feedback to the student essay submissions. And in this particular research, we were particularly interested in if we manipulate in the system prompt the particular gender input into the model, either implicitly or explicitly, if this would lead to pedagogically different feedback for different genders. So for this, we controlled the input manipulation. For explicit manipulation, we told the same model, given the same essay, that the model should generate feedback for an all-boys school. That would indicate that this essay is written by a male student. For the female, we asked the model to generate feedback for all girls schools, and for the mixed gender, we ask it to generate for mixed gender school, so the gender neutral condition. For the implicit bias condition, we systematically manipulated that when we give the essay to these models, in one condition, we gave the essays as written by students. And in the other condition, we replaced some of the gender associated words with their counterfactuals. So for instance, the essay might have his in the original submission. In the counterfactual manipulation, we indicated and replaced all the his with she's, all the his with hers, all the cowboys with cowgirls. So that would indicate implicitly that the essay is written by a particular gendered student. Then we used 6 state-of-the-field large language models to generate feedback on these different conditions. Once the outputs are generated, we converted these feedback into an embedding space to be able to calculate as a one vector how much of a difference there is in terms of the feedback generated for male versus female students, for instance. Then we have looked at the statistical significance in terms of the difference between these two different types of feedback that are generated and mapped each feedback into a two-dimensional space using a technique called TSNE in order to be able to semantically make sense of why, if there are statistically significant differences in the feedback generated by these models, these differences might be occurring. What are the semantic value, why this feedback is observed as statistically significantly different. And the results are very interesting in this line of work. For instance, we show that when the model knows either implicitly or explicitly, in the explicit gender condition, all 6 models that we have studied, GPT-5, GPT-4o, 2 DeepSeek models, Gemini 2.5, and an open source model, Llama, indicate gender bias against the girls' pedagogical feedback. It was also very interesting that in the explicit feedback condition, so when we explicitly told the gender of the student into the model, we did not observe statistically significant difference for DeepSeek models, which indicates that some of the biases might actually be addressed in the later stages of these models' training. But equally interestingly, to these kind of statistically significant differences in terms of the type of feedback the models generate for different gendered students, when we look at why this feedback differs, we identified that most of the differences are associated with the wordings that are agency controlling versus agency supporting. So, for instance, in the models that we have investigated here, when the feedback was given to the boys, the feedback content involved a significant amount of agency supporting wording for boys, but for girls, the wording was a lot more controlling about what they should be doing next. And of course, these kind of findings have significant implications because if we have such embedded bias in these models without appropriate mitigation of these biases, we can actually influence and shape the self-efficacy of students with regards to what they can do and what they cannot do. So we should be systematically studying these kind of differences in the pedagogical outputs of large language models and integrate approaches that would mitigate these kind of negative repercussions. I have given some examples of AI system design features, including the agentic workflows with pedagogical agents and including AI system prompt engineering approaches, and how we could use analytics methodology to be able to see the impact of these changes. But these kind of impact on complementarity discussions are associated with the AI system design features. Equally important are the set of features, set of variables that are associated with human competence, including the humans who are interacting with these models and their prior knowledge in a given task, their current skills, their beliefs and experiences. Now, human competence is a huge space, and the entire cognitive sciences literature is looking at the impact of these different set of variables on various learning capabilities. And I would argue all of these previous considerations on the dispositions that are associated with a human cognition, associated with particular affect and motivation, variables that are associated with situation-specific skills, a human's ability to perceive, interpret, and make particular decisions, as well as their performance measures, would likely have an impact on the extent to which a human can achieve complementarity in their interaction with an AI model. So in my lab, we have been particularly focusing on situation-specific skills like self-regulated learning skills, in particular dispositional aspects of human cognition. And when we look at students who are interacting with generative AI models, who have different set of self-regulated learning competencies, we observe that they actually interact with these models in very different ways. They ask very different questions. So I put here one example of a system, for instance. At UCL, we built a system that looks at individual student analytics and creates a learning analytics dashboard. But most students struggle to get a lot out of these dashboards because of their lack of data literacy and their ability to interact with these learning dashboards. So we built a generative AI assistant that helps students to get the most out of these learning analytics dashboards that we are using. And if we give a standardized questionnaire in week 0 to all of our students at UCL, and then cluster students into high self-regulated learners versus low self-regulated learners, and then look at the students' interactions with the same generative AI system, we observe that those students with high self-regulated learning skills tend to ask a lot more specific, a lot more personalized insights, and a lot more technical questions to these generative AI models. Very bespoke needs are highlighted from this high self-regulated learning student. But if we look at what kind of questions low self-regulated learning students are asking, we observe that they oftentimes asking clarification questions, a lot more emotional support. They're asking for justification of the particular learning actions that they are doing. So we observe that these kind of differences occur based on the existing competencies of the students. And it's also very interesting because if you look at how much these different clusters of students gain from their interactions with such AI systems, it becomes quite clear that the complementarity depends on the specific human competence, on this occasion, students' self-regulated learning capabilities, because our results indicate that when we use generic AI, low self-regulated learning students actually achieve higher learning gains, but learning gains for high self-regulated learning students plateau because these models can provide some amount of support, but when it comes to very highly technical and detailed guidance, they oftentimes fall short, which means that these high self-regulated learning students tend to reach a boundary in terms of what they can get out of these systems, which again highlights my point that different existing competencies of the students are likely to lead to different outcomes in their interaction with generative AI systems. So in order to be able to achieve highest learning gains, it is very important to design the systems in ways that would be applicable or adjustable to the particular needs of the student population for whom we are designing a system. It is also really important to highlight that this kind of complementarity discussion is highly epistemic and relational. So complementarity is indeed influenced by the existing dispositions and attitudes of the students and teachers who are interacting with these systems. I put here one research study from UCL that we implemented in multiple departments. So you can think about a system in which for every single student assignment response, we created in this experiment 3 different feedback variants. One feedback was created by an AI system, one feedback was created by human faculty members, and one feedback was created by human faculty members working with the AI model. And then once we have created these 3 different feedback variants, we presented in the randomized order these feedback variants back to the students and asked them to judge the quality of this feedback on 3 different dimensions of the genuineness of the feedback, usefulness of the feedback, and the relevance of the feedback that is provided to them. Of course, in the beginning, they were blinded to the initial original source of feedback. After they have sent their quality evaluation through the system, we revealed the original source of the feedback, saying that, oh, this feedback was actually generated by AI. Would you now like to revise your evaluation results of the quality of the feedback? And it's fascinating to observe because, number one, if the students actually know the original source of feedback being AI, they tend to judge the quality and credibility of this feedback as statistically significantly lower than human feedback and human AI co-produced feedback. But if they do not know the original source of the feedback, they actually judge the human AI co-created and AI only generated feedback quality to be statistically significantly higher than human alone condition. And these results are then afterwards replicated in various subject areas in different disciplines as well. And the big picture point I want to make here is that however good a particular AI system is, the extent to which students have attitude against the AI systems or for the AI systems would have an implications on the extent to which these systems will lead to complementary gains in terms of the learning gains. So human competence in terms of the dispositional factors are also very important to take into account in the design and development of these systems. There are also issues that I would like to briefly highlight that are associated with these interaction space related variables. We talked about human competence associated variables. We talked about AI system design features, but there are also interaction space related factors. And I would like to highlight these factors briefly as my next set or in my next set of slides. Now, some of this discussion is quite abstract, so I would like to actually give a running example so that you can more concretely think about what do I mean by these different levels of human AI teaming. Let's imagine a system that collects multiple modalities of data from students' interactions and processes these multiple modalities of data to diagnose particularly important collaborative learning interactions. It might be about how mutual students' interactions are, how much each individual student is contributing. It might be what kind of emotional challenges are diagnosed in the specific discourse of the students, and then generates visualizations for creating feedback on collaborative learning activities to the students. Now, at this very complex pedagogical task level, it's very difficult to talk about whether this system is complementary to the teachers or not. So the first thing that needs to be done is a clear analysis of the hierarchical tasks order to be able to have a sense which tasks are best completed by human teachers and which tasks are or can be potentially left to AI models. So in this particular example of providing feedback, of course, you need to start thinking about sub-goals of setting particular aims of a collaborative learning activity, setting particular thresholds and particular values, and refining specific feedback to be sent to the students. In order to be able to provide these feedback to the students, there are also subtasks that are associated with these sub-goals. So AI needs to initially detect the group interactions. Then AI needs to classify groups based on these interactions. And it needs to generate particular feedback based on these classification results. Teachers need to reflect upon these AI-suggested feedback and bring in their own knowledge and own observational information and see to what extent AI-generated feedback is useful. And then teachers need to revise these initial feedback. So all of these are huge sets of tasks, and complementarity, in my opinion, needs to be discussed at this task level, because at every teacher AI touch point for a given task can admit multiple teaming configurations. So, for instance, if the AI system is proposing a set of aims for a given collaborative learning activity, and the teacher is presented with these options to select from, this teacher-AI interaction is one touch point that could lead to different types of teaming. Let me give you one example of the particular feedback generation aspects of this work. So imagine this system is generating feedback on collaborative learning, and the teacher is looking at this feedback to be able to decide whether it is a valuable feedback to be sent to students or should be ignored. At each one of these interaction points, we can think about at least 5 different levels of teaming. You can think about transactional teaming, in which the teacher accepts or rejects AI recommendations. You can think about situational teaming, in which the AI system does not only provide the feedback, but also provides situational information to improve situational awareness of teachers. You can give teachers opportunities to edit the thresholds and hyperparameters of the model to be able to operationalize teacher professional knowledge in the system. You can think about practical teaming, in which AI learns from the teacher's edits, so that every single time AI proposes a new feedback, it is more aligned with the teacher needs and requirements. It's converging towards the professional knowledge of the teacher. Or it can be synergistic, in which the feedback is co-created between the teacher and AI. Let me give you a few examples of, for each one of these levels, how the feedback interface could look like. So at the transactional teaming level, the teacher asks the AI system to generate the feedback. The model processes all the multimodal data, creates the feedback, presents this feedback to the teacher, and the teacher is making a decision of whether this is good to be sent to students or not. Very transactional. Teacher asks some things, AI provides a response to these questions, and then the teacher is sending these, making the decision of sending it or not. In this case, the teacher competence growth is minimal, because it's mainly from the teacher's tool use, but teacher is not really engaging their professional knowledge in these interactions. In the situational teaming interface, you could think about the same feedback that is being provided, like in the transactional teaming approach. But in addition to the feedback, the system actually provides additional evidence on why particular sentences were added to the feedback, and present situational awareness to the teacher, saying that this type of data led me to add this sentence into the feedback. So the teacher takes this opportunity to process these situational signals from the AI model and create the feedback based on particular model parameters and recommendations. Teacher competence growth in this particular teaming example is increased situational awareness. Therefore, it is superior to transactional interactions. In the operational teaming, you can think about the AI system giving the opportunity to the teacher to decide what exactly particular criteria should be when the feedback is being generated, and what should be the thresholds in each criterion to shape the feedback. So, for instance, how much silence time in a group is too much silence is dependent upon various contextual factors of the task. And the teachers should be able to give this kind of edits to the AI model, to operationalize teacher input through the model outputs. In the practical teaming, the system generates the feedback and gives the feedback as an editable feedback opportunity to the teacher. So the teacher starts making edits, changing wordings here and there of a given feedback, but the AI system actually logs what kind of edits are being made by human teachers, and then uses these logs of edits as input to shape the next recommendation to the teacher. So the model is converging towards the pedagogical expertise of the teacher. So In this case, the competence growth from the teacher's point of view is at a meta-pedagogical level in the sense that they actually need to think about what would be the appropriate feedback to provide here and reflect upon their students' interactions to make appropriate edits in the AI recommendations, which means that teachers would be externalizing this tacit knowledge through their edits. So expected competence growth in teachers is much higher in such system prototypes. And at the synergistic teaming level, the idea is that neither of the agents, nor human or AI, is purely, unilaterally has the authority to generate this particular type of feedback. The idea is that the teacher and AI agents should be negotiating meaning of what would be the best feedback to give at a given context and co-create the feedback through their interactions. So AI models should be able to push back if a teacher makes an edit that is not aligned with the learning sciences principles, for instance. And the teachers should be able to push back to the AI model's recommendations if they are not aligned with their professional knowledge or better contextual understanding. In these kind of teaming examples, the competence growth is emergent. It's bidirectional. AI learns from teachers, and the teachers learn from AI through these interactions, and what is being produced is co-created. We have recently undertaken a systematic literature review to be able to see among the existing teacher-facing systems in the literature, what is the percentage of those systems that actually indeed allow synergistic level teaming? And we have observed that these are largely absent in teacher-facing systems in the way that we have defined early on in my talk. Evidence of building a system that would achieve performance of maximum of the each agent alone, better than the maximum of each agent alone, and would show human competence development as well as AI learning increases. They are very difficult to identify in existing literature in existing systems. This is worrying, but it is not surprising in the sense that if you look at the literature more broadly in mature fields like law or medicine, you see that these kind of synergistic interactions are very difficult to achieve. And on average, a human AI teaming leads to significantly better performances than human alone, but performs significantly worse than the best of human or AI alone. So we still have a little bit more work to do in this particular space, but generative AI models are providing significant opportunities on how we could potentially build systems that are synergistic. I'm well aware of time, so I'm just going to wrap it up with a few final slides. So what we have discussed today is essentially that currently a lot of the existing practices in human AI teaming can be situated in the paradigm of replacement. These can be very valuable for productivity gains, helping us save time, but they might be detrimental in the long term for human competence development. So my argument is that the future of AI in education is not necessarily in building better AI models that would be able to do these tasks that we were thinking were uniquely human and only humans could complete for replacement, but maybe work a little bit more towards better human AI teaming. And if we move towards this direction, as I have presented, there are at least two different conceptualizations that we can move and work towards. And I have to say, emerging evidence indicates that if we are just leaving humans with AI systems, synergy is very unlikely to emerge. We need to build particular AI features, AI system features, and we need to educate people about how to interact with these models. If you're interested in this particular approach on how to actually educate people on how to use these technologies that could lead to more synergistic interactions, one of the really recent reports from Pearson provides significant guidance on how more practical implementations can be used in generative AI driven assessment, and how we could actually evolve our assessment pedagogies, assessment practices with the help of generative AI. I would strongly recommend you to have a look at this Pearson report on assessment evolved. And there's also a very nice YouTube video that explains some of the nitty-gritty details of the report if you're interested in watching. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mutlu. We really appreciate it. I really think it was a great session, and I see the chat's really positive now as everyone has to leave. We will have a little time for Q&A. I've pulled some questions out of the Q&A to get to, but for those of you who have to leave now, let me just kind of wrap us up before we move on to the Q&A. We do want to thank Mutlu for his wonderful talk today. To our audience, thank you for being here, being so engaging, and through the chat and just paying attention. The energy was wonderful, and your badge, as I mentioned, is on its way. Just be patient this week, but it will show up in your inbox. A reminder for tomorrow, we do have the session on ethical AI. That was our most requested topic last year when we ran Shape the Future Season 1. So I know many of you are wondering how to navigate this, ethical complexities. And I think Mutlu's talk today about AI teaming and pedagogy really leads us nicely into this conversation around AI ethics. So I think it's going to be an eye-opening discussion on, everything to do with ethics that we're all kind of wondering about. Okay, so there is something on the screen right now. It's just our call to everyone in the educator community. Pearson, and I'm proud to say, as I've worked here for almost 9 years, we really care about what our educator community thinks and feels. And so if you're interested in sharing your perspective with our research community, we're kind of outside in approaching this. This is a space where you can share your insights and connect with your peers globally. So please scan the QR code. There'll be an opportunity to help shape the future, which is the theme of this webinar series, but there'll be an opportunity to shape the future and really influence the future of educational tools and experiences for our students, and participate in research. And there are incentives for joining too. So there's that. Next slide, Brooklyn, if we have a slide after that. And also, if you're interested in learning more about Pearson's AI tools, I know a lot of the stuff that Mutlu is talking about, we're either incorporating now, or that's our North Star to get to, in terms of participation and pedagogy and really getting to the highest level of the technology. So we're working there deliberately to make our models more focused on student success and really keeping the pedagogy at the core of what we do. Okay, so I see there's still a number of people here. So if it's okay, Mutlu, could I ask a few questions that came in on the chat?
Sure.
Perfect. Okay, Kate had a really great question. She mentioned, how can academic institutions help students develop the type of literacy needed to effectively interact with generative AI models and specifically in collaborative learning activities?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a brilliant question. As I tried to highlight in my talk, if we are to achieve this complementarity, these increased learning gains, these synergistic interactions, building the best AI system will only take us to a certain extent. We need to educate people on how they should be interacting with these systems, and helping them understand the potential negative repercussions of unproductive interaction types. Of course, training on AI competencies is very important on this front. At UCL, we are running various training, but I know in multiple institutes, colleagues have been focusing on educating our own faculty and students on AI competency development. But I would like to highlight that this AI competency training, professional learning, is really not only about how to use a particular AI tool. Using a tool is one aspect of it, but a lot of the issues that we are observing, I think, are associated with things like, how do we help people protect their own agency while they're interacting with these? How do we make sure that the students and faculty members are always keeping a critical eye on with the model on the model outputs? How do we actually ensure that the societal implications of the use of these tools are always in the back of mind when people are interacting with these technologies. To me, AI a competency training on teaching how to use a tool is just the tip of the iceberg. And bigger questions are more about how do we help people develop this human-centered mindset in their interactions? How do we help them improve more kind of pedagogy-specific competencies in the use of AI technologies? And this is very challenging.
Definitely. Thank you for your thoughtful answer on that. There was another question that came in. It was Hyatt was wondering around the use of AI at PhD level research, for example, in a dissertation, or maybe even, I'm thinking I know you've published more extensively than I have, but we both have, the use of AI for, publishing research. So what is your thought around AI being accepted as part of the research process and in terms and you also I remember from reading your profile that you're an editor at so I'm sure I'm wondering how you're thinking about that as you get submissions from research and are you trying to look if AI was used and what's the barrier the threshold for acceptability and where do you think that might go in the future?
Well, this is a very complex question, Vince. Maybe I can start by saying that, um, as every academic says, it all depends. So, to me, there are a few things here, right? One of them, I think, is that because you started from a kind of more PhD researcher and early career researcher point of view, to me, it is extremely important for all researchers, as part of their research training, develop these skills of independent critical thinker. So writing a thesis today is itself is not good enough. You need to develop these skills of being an independent thinker. In order to be able to do this, you should be interacting with AI in ways that would always protect your own agency, that you are always the owner of the ideas. So this kind of synergistic interaction in the way that I have described could actually work very well because in this particular case, you are using AI as a thinking partner. You bounce ideas back and then you ask AI model to challenge your line of thinking. And oftentimes these models are sycophantic. They might actually support some of the ridiculous ideas that you might have. And this is hugely problematic. So it's not enough to have these kind of discussions with an AI agent, but you also need to build a network of critical peers in
Yeah.
your field and then interact with them. So as an early career researcher, to me, I think this is extremely important. And perhaps as you move along in your career, you move into a stage where certain tasks become quite monotonous. And you know that you are able to do these tasks anyway. Let's say summarizing a particular paper. You know that you would be able to do this, but you do not necessarily want to spend the same amount of time anymore on these. And then maybe you could change the way that you interact with these models based on your current level of competence and expertise in order to be able to save time on particular tasks. Again, that would be dependent upon the career stage you are in. And putting my editor-in-chief hat on for the British Journal of Education Technology, which is one of the highest impact journals in our field, um, actually we try very hard to identify those pieces in which ideas are not necessarily coming from the authors, and this is certainly not acceptable because the accountability should stay with the authors. So if anything is being submitted to BJet, we would assume that it is written by you as the author. If that is not the case, then it would not be welcome. But that doesn't mean that researchers, particularly non-native speakers, I'm a British citizen, but I'm not a non-native speaker. I'm not a native speaker. So, you can use AI for particular language corrections, for instance, to improve the flow of your own ideas and your writing. And this is certainly okay. I think you're on mute, Vince. Sorry.
I muted myself, sorry. Question came in from Sylvia. When you spoke about the three paradigms of AI in education, they're wondering if this can be applied to all types of higher education students, regardless of background or institution size, socioeconomic status, students who live in more rural areas. Maybe you're in your early days of testing that out, but what are your kind of assumptions or thoughts around that applicability towards a variety of subset of students?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. As I was trying to highlight, to me, these replacement complementarity and synergy paradigms are potentially um, clusters, not necessarily classes in the philosophical sense. So in philosophy, if something is a class, it would define in detail specifically what particular interactions are needed to be able to call this as a class. But what I would argue is that there's huge amount of overlap in the types of interactions that we could cluster as replacement paradigm interactions or complementarity or synergy. So a lot of these variables, I would argue, then can be generalized in this sense of clusters to different backgrounds. But this is a task-specific discussion. So for what particular tasks it is indeed okay to use AI within the replacement paradigm requires a very contextual, situational discussion. For instance, when I give this talk, I sometimes have the impression, from people that they think I'm completely against replacement. This is not the case. I have given this randomized controlled trial study as an example of teachers who are using generative AI to save 31% in their lesson preparation time. This is amazing. Teachers are at the moment are almost always overworked, and they need to engage in various administrative tasks in their professional life that may actually benefit from these kind of replacement paradigms. And if we can build an accurate agentic workflow that would help faculty members, that would help teachers on this kind of administrative workload burden, to me, that's a great gain. But I wouldn't argue for the same replacement paradigm for, let's say, a pedagogical task like feedback creation.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the question is to have an introspection and look at where it's a time-saving task and then test it out on your own. I always say before you deploy something into your classroom, do an internal test, an internal check to make sure that whatever you're doing, even though if you're confident that the AI can handle the task independently with accuracy, always check. I have two more questions before we close up. This is it's not really a question as opposed to I think it provides some sort of a direction. I kind of chuckled when I read it, but I think it's a good one though. It's from Adem and they said, is there an agentic AI intelligent tutoring system that can analyze each student's learning patterns, their prior knowledge, their motivation, their procrastination tendencies, their self-regulation, their confidence, their engagement, their learning difficulties, and then dynamically personalize content, scaffolding, institutional approach, instructional pacing, and even assignment requirements or deadlines to match the student needs. So you'll see why I chuckled there because it's so comprehensive, but I also think it's useful because I don't think that exists right now, but I do think that is where we're trying to get to. I know Pearson is internally, but where do you think, or maybe asking you to forecasting is a little bit unfair, but where do you think we could be? Could we have something like this in a couple years? So I'll let you comment on that.
Well, that's a brilliant comment, actually, and a kind of rhetoric question, I guess, rhetorical question. What I would say is that, of course, as far as I'm aware, it doesn't exist. And I have two comments on this. Number one, there are actually so many intelligent tutoring systems that are not necessarily built on generative AI, but have been built in more traditional modeling techniques. Like I did my PhD on a similar topic. I actually built an intelligent tutoring system based on Bayesian knowledge tracing many years ago, and part of the system was trying to model students' self-regulated learning skills. So there are intelligent tutoring systems that would be looking at one particular aspect of this big question that has been posed to us. But I wouldn't say that there is one system that would be able to do it whole. But I would also add to this another question: do we really want this? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if we actually need a system that would be able to do this whole holistic support. Um, I'm not sure because I have the feeling that a lot of the particularly motivational and affective aspects of human learning is very relational. There are so many kind of dispositional considerations
Mhm.
that we need to take into account. So if we are able to build this system, whether it would be a good thing for the future of education or not is still a question that I'm not sure about.
I'm glad you pointed out the motivation on that because as someone, my PhD is in health psychology and specifically on motivation, self-determination theory, and things of that nature, and identity theory. How we would be able to do that effectively, I'd worry that there'd be too many assumptions in there and perhaps maybe incorrect ones that may not be the most value-oriented ways to integrate them into the systems. Very last question, and I think this is a good kind of wrap up, is a couple of folks asked, including Sajith asked, where can we find case studies like this? Is the published papers from UCL or other bodies that showcase use cases, and if maybe if you want to direct them to the UCL, if there's a specific site, or if there's other websites or blogs or agencies that store really good research papers and pedagogical guidelines for faculty. If there's anywhere you can direct the folks to go to, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, most of my papers, I try to make them open source, but if there are papers that are behind the paywall, but you're interested in this, I would be very happy if you just drop me an email. I can send the research papers. I know most of my colleagues at UCL are doing the same. And UCL repository provides, after the embargo period, all research papers to be publicly available. I know a few other universities have similar repositories, and actually Stanford has a repository on AI in education specifically. So they put all the recent papers there in the repository. So these are valuable sources. But I have to say, a lot of particularly these advanced levels of teaming and partnership that I have just discussed, is literally cutting edge research. So
Yeah.
we are actually now working and doing various set of prototypes and doing workshops with teachers and faculty members to be able to see which particular prototypes lead to these kind of dependent variables that I have just mentioned, and what design features are appreciated. So the field is just emerging, I would argue, and I think there is also huge value in kind of um, ground up approach. You based on your faculty contexts might be thinking about particular problems, and these days building prototypes has become much easier than in the past. So you could actually explore some of these as well, and I would very much appreciate hearing from anyone who has interesting ideas or implementations and case studies to create these knowledge exchange opportunities. As I said, ours are mainly open source and freely available, but I would also love to hear from other colleagues who are participating in these discussions in their contexts, what kind of prototypes and interventions actually work.
Thank you very much. I can probably speak for everyone, and thank you for the thoughtfulness of all your responses for these questions. There were more questions that came in, so apologies to anyone who asked a question who didn't get it, answered live, but we appreciate the 20 minutes you went extra, and we also really appreciate the more than 600 educators who stayed on live to view this Q&A. So I think it shows the level of engagement on their end, but also how fascinating and why we're truly honored to be partnering with you in some of this cutting edge emergent research. So thank you again to Dr. Mutlu Cukurova. Wonderful talk. And we hope that everyone who's still hanging on with us, we see you tomorrow during the AI Ethics Shape the Future, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.